This is a Film Stories original podcast. We made this.
The truth is in here. This is our special Fight the Future Minute podcast. I'm Russ Hugo, and you're listening to our coverage of minute 65 of The X-Files, Fight the Future. This minute begins at 1:04 and ends at 1:04:59, and it is best described as B-pocalypse. What were your recollections seeing this minute, the first time in the theater?
I think I was terrified. Because we had said in the minute before, you don't know what's going to happen, and then finally this all kicks off, and millions of bees are suddenly flying out, and they're very aggressively buzzing. It's a really unpleasant sort of situation. Like, you can imagine even just one angry bee coming at you. It's not good, but this many, like, you're going to be really, really freaked out. And I think that pretty much everyone was in the theater.
No arguments. I'm not a big fan of the bee scene in of a Herrenvolk also, but this is much more intense and over the top. And I don't even consider myself bee-phobic more than the average person, but yeah, the sounds, the way, just like you said, the loud buzzing, it's very aggressive.
It's just that very angry sound.
Scary times. But before the bees come out, there's a little talk. Maybe it's not electricity, and we get a Mulder Scully run comment.
I remember that from promos too. The way he says Scully and she says yeah. Like, I remember that being used in commercials and trailers, and really, like, they don't show you what happens, but it's just that really quick exchange. And that just sticks in my head as being shown for a promo for the movie. And you can hear the trembling in her voice a little bit too.
Mm-hmm.
Before he says get up and run, which I think works really well too.
It's one of the few lines I do remember vaguely from promotion and things. At least I think I do in my head. I think that works really well. You have Mulder's intuition, sensing something's wrong. It works well as a character thing. I'm less thrilled about Scully having trouble escaping. It just seems a little unnatural, especially considering how much of the film Scully kind of is out of the action and in the needing to be rescued timeline here, to have this scene where she has trouble kind of getting her coat over her as she's trying to escape the bees, and she can't really see, and then Mulder goes, "Come on, give me your hand." It was a little too traditional action tropey, male-female dynamics, not to play that card, which may bore people, but considering how well those two generally work in scenes like that, those two characters, and even how the film starts off, I don't know, it just felt a little awkward, a little forced.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. Yeah, I noticed that too. And like, he's way far in front of her. Like, it's not like she just stood there and is, not trying to run. Maybe she had to undo her belt first on her jacket, and that, I don't know. But yeah, I didn't really see a reason for it. But I did notice when he goes back and grabs her hand, like, if there's a quick shot of his face, he looks genuinely terrified. Like, as an actor, not just the character. Being swarmed by all these bees, there's a look on his face that's just not the character, it's just the actor.
Which, believe me, I have no acting talent, but in that scene I'd be pretty good at method.
Yeah, you'd be definitely concerned.
Now, I remember in the previous minute you talked about these being some real bees. And were there real bees around, both the actors?
Oh yeah, there were definitely. So I have there's a lot of notes in this book about bee facts and bee wrangling. So if you want some bee facts, I can give you those right now.
Oh, we want them.
Okay.
We want them, please.
There were real bees. So Dr. Norman Gary was the bee wrangler. They had to screen all of the actors in the crew for allergies first, and they found that Gillian Anderson's stunt double did have a bee allergy, so they had to replace her with another actor. But that was the only issue they had. And so the bees were all kept in hives. They were kind of like scooped out and like sort of tossed out when they were needed, like for close-up shots of bees swarming. So the big vents in the floor. And also, I love how the vents open as a sidetrack. They don't open all at once. They kind of open sequentially down the row. I just find that more scary. Like they're slowly coming at you instead of just opening, bam, all at once. And you see like the bright silver turns dark when the bees are released. I just think that's really effective.
It's also works with like as a soundtrack, like the percussive.
Yeah, it's like it's coming closer. Yeah. So there were bees in those vents. That was a remote controlled system. There were some poor dead bees. They were glued onto the costume, so it looked like they were just covered more. It sounds like a horrible shoot.
Yeah.
So there were real bees, dead bees, and then there were visual effects to add more bees, as they swarm up to the ceiling and everything. But there were plenty of bees in this scene. Let's see. They did use stunt doubles for the wide shots of them running, but they definitely had close-ups too, and that's when you can see, really they were being swarmed around. The crew all thought this scene would be a complete disaster, but it worked out. Working with animals is always tricky. You can't really tell bees what to do. And in the end, so when they get to the airlock, there were these huge fans that they used to like really just blow the bees off the actors. And apparently bees can cling to a surface in 50-mile-an-hour winds. So you can imagine how much of a blast that fan would be to get them to shake loose. No one had protective gear on, so the crew wasn't really wearing any, masks or anything. There were only a handful of stings that people got. None of the actors or stunt doubles got stung, which I think was pretty incredible.
Yeah, they're the ones who are out there
running,
flailing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's all the bee info. That was hats off to the crew that made that happen.
Yeah, and it's very effective. I mean, it looks real. The CG, I mean, you could maybe guess that some of the bees higher in the dome might be CG, but it's very difficult to determine what is what. It's they did a great job.
Yeah, it doesn't scream out as this is an effect shot. It just bees swarming too. That's not that detailed. It's just the sort of the moving mass of little shapes, and I think that's why it works so well.
The only other thought is that huge fan that blows them off, and the bee later that everyone loves stings them, and the fact that none of the characters here get stung, but there's so many bees. And going back to the fact that if there's similar kinds of bees to the ones that were in Herrenvolk and how ready those ones were to sting people, when I watched it, it felt a little contrived that they didn't get stung there, but then it somehow manages to survive a plane ride and all this kind of stuff and not notice that you have a bee that's been agitated. Not to mention running around a field with helicopters blowing at you. No spoilers for minute 66, but it seems just because of how many bees there were, because of how the bees had been introduced before. Yeah, maybe it's a different species. The bee thing, set-wise, as a scene, works well. The pacing of how it then and how it resolves later, I'm not so sure was as effective, but that's for someone else to talk about in detail. But I did want to get your thoughts, because our territory right now does talk about the fact that they didn't get stung when the bees are super angry.
Exactly. Maybe. Yeah. Well, because at this point in time, you don't expect there's a bee actually clinging on to her coat. And maybe he was just in shock. That poor little bee just didn't know what was going on, so he decided to just sit there for a while, right under her collar. He had to survive running back through a cornfield, a car ride, a plane ride.
Yeah, and not move or wiggle. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, intrepid little bee.
Hey, aliens. anything's possible. But
that's right.
I do have to bring it up.
That's right.
I have to.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, it's stretching the bounds of believability, I think. But for this scene, I think it's very effective.
One of the things I think Fight the Future kind of sums up for me is that as a whole, if you follow the plot, it's very difficult to have any sort of consistency in reality about it. There's a lot of assumptions and a lot of coincidences, more so than I think standard X-Files would be, but there's a lot of really good set pieces contained in there. And if you can shut off your brain and just enjoy it as a popcorn film, there's a lot of fun to be had. But
oh yeah,
when you start looking real closely, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure about that. And at some point, things will. And I just remember when I first watched the film, the bee was one of those things where it didn't bother me because of the kiss blocking. As I'll just come out and say I've always been a no Romo in that sense. But it was more of, although I didn't use that term, not that to be fair, I just didn't care too much. I preferred them as friends. But it just seemed like, oh, wow, that's a one too many. That was kind of the film point where I kind of checked out. I could enjoy it as a popcorn film, but at that point I was like, okay, this film isn't playing fair, so I just go along for the ride, shut down the brain, and just take it as that.
Yeah, just go along with it. And I have to say, I like that bee clung on, so I am in your side on this. So.
Oh wow, great!
Definitely.
Please expand while we're here, unless you've already hashed about this on the Xcast and I missed it.
No, I haven't. No, I mean, no Romo. Back in the chat room days, yeah, there were a few of us, not many, but there were a few.
And why do you take that position?
Oh, we're getting into a big thing here.
Unless you don't want to.
It's not that I'm against that. I don't want them only to be, strict partners. Like I like them being very close, like soulmates even, that's fine. I just don't like the kind of push romantic part of it. And I find that very jarring, like kind of later on in the film. I like their friendship, I like their closeness, I like how they work together, I like how they, share their lives. I think it's just, the sexy romance I don't really go for.
I actually started working on an essay about this, not specifically Mulder and Scully, but I think it's a perfect example of I'm ethically bothered by it to a degree, and I'm just curious to see what you take about this, because it's not so much that I have an issue with them being a couple. I have an issue with people needing them to be a couple. I have an issue with people forcing characters and or actors into sexual and romantic relationships and deconstructing friendships and not allowing a space for friendship outside of sexualized partnerships, especially in media, is what bothers me. And that you have these two characters who are explicitly created to kind of defy these standard tropes to some degree. I mean, there is soulmates, but I think Carter and everybody else's intention was to make them very close but platonic. And to have this extreme resistance by culture that really, because there are very few to no examples, and you brought up Doctor Who earlier, and that's another example of something that really bothers me in the sense of that our culture and media is so obsessed with sexualizing interactions, especially between men and women, to the degree that even a character who has been asexual for 40 years or whatever and is an alien and 600 years old still is going to have to, if they're around a relatively standard-looking human, especially if it's a male and a female, they're going to have some sort of degree of romantic or sexual tension. I think it's problematic. It's not necessarily inherently evil that people have this motivation to the social interest that to pressure here, but it bothers me that it doesn't get problematized to the degree that I think it should. I don't think society is self-reflexive or media criticism is reflexive enough about it in that way to where I feel comfortable giving it a pass, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay, that was put very well. I think you and I should talk later on, because that's pretty much exactly what I feel like. I I like that this was different. It was something intentionally different. And it's not just the boring of, oh, will they, won't they? Oh, they got together and now... And that's when kind of all the fun goes out of it, I think. And I think not every relationship has to be going in that direction for it to be meaningful between two people. And that's what I liked about The X-Files for a long time.
Yeah. All right. Hallelujah. But until our next minute, remember as always, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. The Sanctuary, a Star Trek, politics and economics podcast.
Sci-fi needs more strong women, and they had her say that, and for that split second she was on camera, she was in uniform as Kira Nerys. And I think that was a really well done piece of framing, a good piece of television, a good piece of framing that was really well done. The whole thing was really, really well done. And I think they got it pretty much right on the mark.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast.
I hadn't thought about it any more than Rimmer can see himself, that's unusual. And I'm just thinking out loud now, is there a reason for that? Or is it just for that one gag?
It's possibly for that one. Well, no, because there's other ones, like where he gets haircuts later in the series, where it's important for him to see himself. And then the build-up is that he hasn't noticed yet.
That was last episode.
It was future. Yes, it was.
Don't worry. I think we're doing this a lot. It'll be people saying, I don't know if you watch Alan Partridge, when he says, "Stop getting Bond wrong." So I think there'll be plenty of people telling us that we're getting everything wrong, which is great. I love
it. Between the Notes.
Well, I kicked myself because I totally didn't make the connection that Bill Lee would have been related to Spike Lee until I actually looked it up as part of the preparation for this podcast. I was like, oh, he's Spike Lee's dad. I never made that connection.
And he's still going. He's early 90s. He's still with us, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was looking up. Apparently, they haven't collaborated since the early 1990s because they've had a bit of a falling out, which is a shame because I think that I thought the Do the Right Thing score was brilliant.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.